name's Jennifer. I'm from the University of Guelph, and I am ONCAT's postdoc. But it's with pleasure, as a former transfer student myself, that I get to introduce our panelists, our student panelists, and they are Shannon, if you don't mind just doing a little wave. Shannon from the University of Guelph, Constant, a graduate of Seneca College, and Flora, a student who is currently enrolled at George Brown College. Today's session is more of a casual chat, an opportunity for us to all have a conversation about our transfer student experiences. So with that, I hope you'll sit back and relax, enjoy some stories from our personal experiences, and also, if you have questions, we would love to hear from you. There are 2 mics positioned in the room at either side, so the last 10 minutes we'll reserve for your questions. And but yeah, enjoy the conversation, and thank you for being here today. So Shannon, if you don't mind just giving us a little bit of an update of where you are right now with your studies at the University of Guelph.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a while ago that I transferred to the University of Guelph. I transferred there in my undergraduate degree. I've actually just started my graduate studies back in September. I'm doing a political science master's, so that's super exciting for me. I graduated in 2022 with a double major in political science and criminal justice and public policy. So yeah, it's been quite successful for me at the University of Guelph. I'm a big fan.
and we're a little biased because we're both affiliated with the University of Guelph. So shout out to our Guelph peers in the audience today, because it's a fabulous institution among other fabulous institutions here in Ontario. And Constance, I understand you're a graduate of Seneca College. What are you up to today?
Yeah, I graduated from Seneca College in 2022, and so that's a little over a year now, and right now I'm a freelance animator. And so what that looks like is sometimes I've got like a lot of work, and sometimes I'm like have no work going on. And right out of school, I was feeling like great, because a lot of school was really frustrating, but now that enough time has passed, I'm like, I kind of want to go back to school, so I've been...
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah. So that's where I'm at right now.
Thank you so much for sharing, Constance. I know you are in the room with many people who love and value higher education, so perhaps post-session we can chat about your future aspirations to return to the system. Thank you for being here today. And Flora, welcome. I understand you're currently pursuing your studies at George Brown College. A shout out to the George Brown College colleagues in the crowd. I'm also a former colleague of George Brown College. And what are you up to currently at George Brown College, Flora?
I'm currently in the Applied Behavioral Analysis program, the Bachelor of Arts program. Started off at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University. And I was started in psychology, and then I transferred to the George Brown ABA program about a year in, yeah.
Very, very interesting. I as well transferred my studies as a transfer student back in the early 2000s. I transferred from Carleton University into George Brown College. And so you and I have a lot to relate to in regards to our transfer journeys. And that's actually the next topic for our discussion today, is if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us a little bit about your post-secondary, your education journey, your transfer journey, and I won't name names or pick, so whoever would like to take the floor, feel free to do so.
I can go first.
Okay. Thank you, Shannon.
No worries. So I started at Trent University in Peterborough. If you remember what I said my current master's is in, hearing that I started my undergraduate degree in forensic science is probably going to be a little bit funky. But back in 2018, I started in forensic science at Trent University. I kind of discovered probably about November of first year that I was not very happy. It was nothing again. I loved Trent campus. That was actually probably one of the hardest goodbyes. But just knowing that I wasn't too happy with my program, it was kind of hard to get over that feeling. And so I'm from Guelph originally. I'm born and raised in Guelph. So when I was on my reading week in October, I'd kind of already started thinking about it. And I luckily had an older sibling who had also undergone the transfer process. So he was at Guelph, and he kind of showed me around the campus on my reading week. And so it was kind of already starting the thought process. And then on my winter break, I was like, one semester deep, I can't do this for the rest of my life. So I was looking at everything, and I ended up applying to transfer. I think it was end of December of 2018. And then I got accepted into Guelph, I think it was end of February, beginning of March. And so then I got to start undergoing all the figuring out what I needed, what did I need to do, how I was gonna leave all my balances at Trent, because you know, you have your meal plan and everything that you find out that you have to use by the end of the year. So that was fun and fresh to find out, but it was honestly not too difficult. I actually had reached out to admissions at Guelph a few times, just kind of asking what to expect, what I needed to do, what I should do, should I switch my courses, should I do this, should I do that? I mean, for the most part, just looked at my courses and were like, most of the stuff you're probably gonna have to retake first year level course at Guelph anyway, so kind of just like pick your courses as you want them, and you know, when you get back over here, you'll be able to figure out, because you know, switching from a Bachelor of Science to a Bachelor of Arts is actually a lot easier, because the prerequisite courses in a first year, there's not too many of them, so yeah, so I found that like accessing admissions was actually quite easy at Guelph and not very painful, which I'm very grateful for, because everyone, you know, you're like talking to registrarial offices and you're like, oh my God, but they were all very lovely, so I'm very grateful for that. And then I started at Guelph in September of 2019.
Thank you so much for sharing the good and the bad, the challenges and the highlights of your journey. And I think there are definitely some registrarial colleagues in the room today who benefit from hearing your perspective as a student who has had this journey in our post-secondary system. I'm going to call on you, Constance, because I was so excited today when I came to the conference and I saw Constant, because Constant and I were both community animators in transfer for ONCAT, and we had chatted about our transfer journeys as a part of that program, which features student stories related to those who have experienced transfer in Ontario, and also students who are motivated like us to share our stories with others who are thinking about or engaged in the process. And so, Constant, I know your journey. We've chatted about it lots. You know my journey as well. But would you mind sharing with the room today some of the highlights from your journey, and you know, just share what you recall from your travels from Sheridan, right? Sheridan to Seneca.
Yes, for sure. I transferred from Sheridan College in 2019 to Seneca College, and my transfer journey went pretty smoothly. I think a lot of I wasn't aware of a lot of the resources that were available at the time, like such as ONCAT. Like I found out about ONCAT after I had already transferred. I think it would have been like a really useful resource at the time had I known that there were people I could talk to and resources online to like look into. I found out, I learned more about transferring colleges from just asking like my personal network, people I knew who had done it before, or alumni, and so that was really helpful. And then when I transferred, I remember trying to transfer some of my college courses, and through the registrar, they didn't give me a hard time. They were like pretty helpful. I just had to fill out the forms they needed me to fill out, and then it went pretty smoothly. But I do remember some of my classmates having a harder time with the registrar, and I'm not sure why. Yeah, but all in all, it went pretty smoothly for me.
It's really interesting you highlight peers and the influence of peers in the transfer experience, because that was one of the big take-homes. Shout out to Nick and Jeff and Henry in their presentation yesterday, which did highlight some peer aspects, peers and family and non-institutional supporters as being huge influences in students' transfer journeys. So thank you for sharing that today. And another, I'll give props to Constant, because I recall from ONCAT days, you documented and shared with ONCAT, and ONCAT published this online, your wonderful transfer journey in an infographic, in a comic form. And so if you haven't seen that piece on ONCAT's website, I encourage you to check it out, because it was really well done, and I think appealed to a lot of students who are considering the journey and maybe looking for an alternative way to figure out and find out and hear from a peer what it's like to transfer within our system today. And Flora, do you want to share with us a little bit about your transfer journey?
Yeah, mine was a little bit different, mostly just because I transferred during COVID, so I couldn't ever really go in and talk to any student advisors. There was a lot of emails and phone calls, which I feel like made it a little bit more difficult. That being said, I was able to, because of how similar the two programs are that I transferred into, most of my courses, which I found really helpful, I talked to the head of the department of the program that I was transferring into, which he gave me a pretty good outline of what they were expecting or looking for. And yeah, I feel like very similar situations to you guys too. Yeah. So I don't want to double on it, but yeah.
It's so interesting. You mentioned the pandemic and experiencing being a student and having your education journey throughout the pandemic, and that was definitely something I learned a lot during this year's conference from multiple presentations highlighting the outcomes and the influences and impacts of the pandemic on students. And I wondered, thinking about our next topic of discussion for the panel today, what kept you motivated throughout your transfer journey, especially considering pandemic realities?
I think it was a couple different things. I think one of the main thing was my professor at TMU was very encouraging for me. He was one that brought up to me the program that is available at George Brown, and the more research I did on it, the more I felt like I connected and would fit in better and learn more. And the career path that college offered just was looking forward was mostly the big thing, because the present at that time was not that awesome. So yeah, I would say that.
Very interesting. And in Constant, I know you were not transferring in the pandemic period, but what motivated you in your transfer journey?
I think a big thing that motivated me was, again, my peer support network, who gave me all their different insights and perspectives, and also tips on what courses to avoid, or what kind of things you need to do or should to have a smooth transfer experience. So I found that really helpful.
It's wonderful to have a great support network, both in and on campus, but also outside campus in your communities and at home as well. I think that's one thing I was really fortunate to have as well. So Shannon, what kept you motivated? Shannon is an exceptionally involved student leader at the University of Guelph. If anybody wants to chat with Shannon, I had the pleasure of chatting with Shannon about her student leadership and involvement during our lunch hour today. But was that something that kept you involved as a transfer student? Did you connect with your peers? Did the involvement, the extracurriculars on campus, was that something that really kind of brought you in and kept you there?
So actually, funnily enough, I didn't know about any of the extracurriculars until I got there. My brother was actually involved. So I was in Model UN at Guelph in my undergrad. I actually ran the club in my 4th year, so that was pretty fun. But my brother was a part of Model UN when I ended up there in my 2nd year, and then it was 2 of my best friends I've actually still friends with to this day, that I met through Model UN, and one of them was on the water polo team at Guelph, and they were desperate for people, so I ended up getting swooped up into water polo until the pandemic started. But what motivated my transfer journey a lot was kind of just the light at the end of the tunnel. I, in high school, was super involved in mock trial and stuff like that, so people always told me that they kind of always thought I was in criminal justice. So the fact that I was like transferring from like a STEM program into like political science and criminal justice, people were like, oh, like I kind of just thought that's what you were always doing. So that I would say that it was kind of the getting through the things I wasn't necessarily loving as much and looking forward to what I was going to be learning was kind of the stuff that I think was more in tune with what I liked that kind of kept me going.
It's important to have those things to motivate us, and I can definitely relate to, you know, the light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm sure with all of us here on the panel today, it was that our goal in and amongst other wonderful motivating factors that helped us see and to where we are today, and will continue to inspire us and push us towards our educational goals. I wondered, because you brought up that great point about there's challenges in any educational journey, but particularly in the transfer journey. And maybe I'll loop back around to you, Flora, if you're open to sharing with us perhaps any challenges you experienced or faced at your new institution after you had made the transfer and enrolled in your new program.
I think in my new program, the biggest challenge was, so in university, I feel like for the most part, you have like one big exam or maybe two big exams. And in college, or at least in my program, it was very much not like that. Like there was something due from each class like every week. So getting used to that, I think was really different for me. But you know, actually, I enjoyed it a lot more now because I feel like I learn in smaller parts, and I feel like I learn more this way. But at the beginning, it was definitely very hard to keep track of everything. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. And Constant, do you recall any challenges from your journey?
From the transfer journey itself, I guess not really, but just the program was really rigorous that like I attended, and so dealing with burnout was really tough. I remember I actually set up to meet with student services, and my meeting happened on like a day in March, like the day everything shut down, like because of the pandemic, and so I never ended up getting access to those services. Yeah.
Well, the day everything shut down, I recall I was at Shoppers Drug Mart in line behind a whole bunch of people buying mountains of toilet paper, if you all can remember when. But that's it's so interesting that you had that experience, and it's very kind of you and brave of you to share the good and bad of your transfer journeys, because I think we've grown from the good and the bad, and where we are today, the successes that we celebrate are a product of the good and the bad, the hard and the not so hard parts of our journey. And I wonder, and maybe I'll revert back to you, Shannon, if you don't mind sharing with the room today, how do you think transfer has impacted your life today, or where you're at today?
Yeah, well, very positively. As you can tell, I'm probably a very big fan of the University of Guelph. I got extremely involved. I was, in my first year, I feel like I shelled a lot, like in my room, and maybe that would have made a bit more of a difference, but I felt like I had a lot more things I was passionate about. Once I was in the degree program, I liked more, and then I got more involved in stuff around the school. And now I'm doing a graduate program at Guelph too, so clearly I liked it enough to go back for more. But yeah, I would say very, very positively, I feel like where I am now is a lot better than where I was back in 2018.
It's great that you attribute you have many things to celebrate and many successes. We during our discussion at lunch, you're a very impressive person and student, and it's nice to know that transfer helped you get to where you wanted to be and helped you find the success that you're enjoying and receiving at this point in your life. So yeah. Thank you. What about you, Constance? How has transfer impacted your life?
I think transferring has impacted my life because it's just in a positive way, because it was a little bit challenging and it was like scary to like dive into this new thing, especially not knowing much, because I wasn't aware of a lot of the institutional resources that I could reach out to or use. And so I learned that I just got more comfortable talking to the registrar and as I had to bother them more and more about getting my stuff in order, and yeah.
Self-advocacy sounds like one of the skills, was one of the gifts
for sure
of your transfer journey, and that's an important skill. Is that something that you can relate to, Flora? How do you think transfer impacted your life?
I would say, I feel like transfer was like kind of a necessary point in the next step in my life. Because I think when I came right out of high school, I went straight to university, and I didn't really know what I was wanting to do. And I think transferring was the one big decision I made for myself to be like, no, this is like your career path. Like, this is what you really want. This is like something you've had time to think about and experience and do in the field, and like something that I'm more passionate about, and not just doing because I feel like I have to be in school. I'm doing it because I want to be in school. So I guess I'm kind of empowering in that way.
Empowering, I love that. And it's this panel is really empowering and hopefully motivating. And I wondered if you had a time machine and you could go back and have a conversation with your post-secondary self. Is there any advice you'd give to yourself, or maybe you'd give to a student peer about the transfer process after realizing the impact transfer has had on your life? Flora, do you want to take that question first?
Yeah, for sure. I would say try to speak to students that are in a program that you're interested in, someone with experience. Like, even if they're just 1 year into their program, I think it's really helpful to listen to your peers and what they have to say, because a lot of my advice was coming from like academic advisors and like adults, professors, that kind of stuff, which of course is very important too. But someone you can relate to better might help you kind of figure out a bit more what you want. Yeah.
Peer-to-peer advice, it's really helpful and appreciated. I know when I was enjoying my own transfer journey, I definitely picked the brains of a few of my peers in terms of their experiences, especially at the institution I was going into. And it was not necessarily academic stuff. It was, okay, where do I go to eat, and where's the best place to hang out at in between classes. And so I love that you highlight the peer factor.
Yeah,
and Constance, if you could get in that Back to the Future time machine, what would you say to your pre-transfer self?
I think a lot of what I would say would boil down to just be like, it's okay. Like, you don't need to be so nervous or scared. Like, new things are scary, obviously, but there's a lot of support to be found, both from your peer network, and also there's actually quite a lot, like, it's not just ONCAT, there's quite a lot of institutional support out there that's being offered to students from various institutions, like from college to college or college to university, and that kind of thing, and to maybe look more into utilizing those resources.
Can I add to it? I would say,
yes, please
also
do.
To my younger self, like, check out ONCAT.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Okay, yes.
I don't know about ONCAT until earlier this year, so.
On transfer.
On transfer. Was that the old name?
We have a multitude of online resources for students that we can highlight post-session, and but ontransfer.ca is a wonderful student portal, and then oncat.ca is often a web resource that we as administrators, professionals, researchers working in the field utilize to find out the latest and greatest, the news, and also to access research reports and funding opportunities. But definitely we're trying to promote ontransfer.ca as a wonderful student resource, in addition to the wealth of information that's already incorporated into our post-secondary Indigenous institutes, colleges, and universities, their website offerings, and social media, because I did hear from one of the sessions yesterday how great social media is as a resource for those who are aspiring to transfer. So lots of great web resources out there. I see we have about 5 minutes left in today's panel, and wanted to give an opportunity for all of you to share with all of us who are working in higher education today or researching higher education today, any advice you have for us to support transfer students at our institutions or in our realms within the post-secondary system. So I'll start with Shannon, if you don't mind. Any advice on how we can support transfer students now and into the future?
That's a really good question. And I'm gonna have to probably pick my own brain because it's been a few years.
And if you're not sure of advice, maybe you could even share a story of someone within your original institution or the institution you transferred into, a professional person, a staff member, a faculty member, who was really supportive of your journey, and you can highlight that as well, because I think we all really learn a lot from your stories and experiences.
Actually, it's like one of the, I would say, weirder kind of connections I made was when I went to the registrar's office at Trent to kind of ask questions about like how to, tie up the loose ends, and what I needed to do was the person who was kind of sitting at the front there, I think she was the secretary, and she actually went to the University of Guelph for her undergrad, so we actually bonded a little bit, because I was like, yeah, that's actually where I'm going to be transferring to. So she was like, oh, you got to check out the bull ring, and she was like, you got to do these things, and I was like, this is so freaky. But yeah, that was a kind of weird little bond I had. I would say the only thing that maybe would have helped a little bit more was because my transfer was so drastic, like not only was it schools, but it was colleges completely as well, was that my brother had told me, hey, you should go and visit a BA counselor because you need to know what you need to take in the fall. So like kind of even just someone saying, hey, like, while it might be a little bit easier because there's less requirements, like still talk to someone, because actually it was by going to a BA counselor that I found out that one of the courses I needed to take was being offered for the last time the first fall I was there. So I very luckily got signed into that class and made my way through the rest of my undergrad pretty seamlessly. But that kind of little, go see a counselor, like, they are super helpful. So yeah, just having someone as soon as you're in that new path kind of being like, this is what you need to do, this is what you're looking at. I wouldn't even say just as you first get there. I visited the BA council a few times to be like, what do I need to do? What's left? Especially once I decided to double major. That added a bunch of other things, and try to add a minor later too, but that ended up being too much. So, but yeah, definitely like talk to BA counselors, or depending on what program you're like BSc, like talk to a counselor. They will help you map where you're going next, because the transfer process ends up being kind of longer because it takes a few months, and it's kind of nice to be like, okay, I'm here. What now?
Connecting with a counselor, that is really great advice. And for those of us in the room who are in a counseling or in an advising capacity in our roles today, I hope you feel valued, because I hear from your experiences how supportive and positive that once you got there, once you were nudged to go, how helpful that was, and applauding the counselors and the advisors in the room for the great work you do in support of transfer students. I am conscious of the clock, so I will offer the last word, the last bit of advice to all of us in the room, to Constance or Flora, whoever would like to go next.
I could, really quickly, I would say a thing that I feel like was really difficult when I was transferring was not having enough information about what transferring is, what it meant. It was a situation where you know so little that you don't know what questions to ask. So I think maybe being offered up information, I don't know, like a brochure, just any kind of way to like make the process a little bit easier, a bit more understanding. So yeah, quickly. Lot
more information, the better.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it's all often about timing. It'd be very interesting to have a chat after the session about the resources you did use and when you access those resources, because that's something I've been hearing in the sessions today, the importance of resources. And there are a wealth of resources available to students, put together by our great colleagues here in the system. But how that information is getting to students is something that we're really interested in understanding. And I know there's many things in the works, many new resources upcoming at multiple institutions to support students and their need and thirst for these resources related to transfer. So thank you, Flora. And Constance, do you have any last words about anything you want to tell the room about a transfer and how to support transfer students?
I was actually just going to say the same thing as Flora. Like, maybe there's a lot of resources out there, and I'm sure there's like a lot of students that need those resources, mostly just bridging that gap so that the students that need the resources are aware of the things that they have access to. Yeah, like setting up booths maybe in
Okay.
schools more often.
Yeah, great
things
example.
Like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting time now that we get to transition to, it is the question period. And so on either side of the room, we do have mics. If you do have a question, feel free to stand up and use those mics so that everyone can hear your question. And for those of you in the room who are working on these wonderful resources or who are evaluating or putting together new resource options for students, whether they're in-person supports, online supports, feel free to use our experiences to ask questions about how to position and how to incorporate the knowledge that students are looking for in regards to transfer. So I'll invite anyone who has a question, feel free to rise up and take advantage of the microphones because we're all ears and we would love to continue this conversation, but make it more of a two-way conversation with the room. So is there anyone who would like to join and ask a question?
Yes.
Hi, Meryl.
Hi, Meryl Barada from ONCAT. Thanks so much, everyone, for this panel. It was really interesting to hear all your perspectives. So one of the key priorities ONCAT has in its new strategic plan is to broaden our service to students to provide more tools to help them identify their career paths and skills that would help them in their careers. And so we just wanted to know, do you have any thoughts on the need for better navigation supports to help you in that journey in your career paths? I know, Flora, you mentioned that that was something that really transformed you. It was part of the impact. So yeah, if you could just speak a little bit to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Meryl.
Like in terms of like, so sorry, I just want to clarify your question. I'm sorry. You're asking about how like accessible it can be or how it can be more accessible or?
Yeah, like how could institutions and like ONCAT as well help you in your experience at an institution navigate your career? Are there ways that we could help with that as you're in school?
I definitely think so. Honestly, even if there was information on school websites about what transferring looks like, maybe some examples of it, like other people who have done it in the past, talking about it, I think would be really helpful. Yeah.
I think a really useful resource would be maybe like students that have experience with transferring and are willing to share their experiences can like put their information out there for any students like who are interested in transferring to the same programs, and that way they can reach out to this person directly and yeah, like ask any questions they might have and get like a first-hand experience with like any questions or inquiries they might have. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I had a peer from Trent actually transfer to Guelph the year after me. So they ended up texting me a lot and being like, what did you do? What's the website? Like, what do I need? How do I get transcripts? Transcripts, that's a big one. Figuring out transcripts was like, does high school still matter? Like, this is, I don't know, is it just first year you want to know? Is it everything?
Yeah.
Keynote, I'm pretty sure for me it was everything all the times. So, but yeah, I actually had what do you need? And I just ended up being like, this is what I did. This is the website I used. But I feel like even as someone who's gone through the process of like, if I had known about ONCAT or OnTransfer, like I feel like it kind of has it much more clearer than even what I knew. So I feel like making that more accessible to students would be super helpful as well.
Great advice and great responses, especially considering it's hard to be in the hot seat and just take questions from the floor. So thank you for your honesty and for your coolness here up on in the hot chairs. I will open the floor to our next question.
So good afternoon. My name is Risha Tony from Humber College. And my question is, there's a lot of information on transfer and pathways, but what are some tips that you have for us on how we should disseminate that information? Where should it be online? Should it be on social media? Maybe there's somewhere we're not even thinking of. So what tips would you give us on how to make that information more accessible?
It's a good question.
Great question, yeah. So you can start about where you got your information from in regards to your transfer journey, and then enlighten us on any information sources that perhaps those in a different generational category than myself or others in the room may be using to access information. Flora, did you want to go first?
I'll say something.
Yeah, great question.
I would say definitely putting it on social media makes it real easy. Instagram for sure, just like maybe a step-by-step that's like very simplified. I'm going to talk about the younger generation, even younger than myself. They love TikTok, and they can get a lot of information from a TikTok video. And there's a lot of other things that I put on TikTok, and it doesn't have to be funny or anything like that, but just quick and easy to understand, I think is very helpful for younger kids. Yeah, some Gen Zs.
Yeah. Interesting, TikTok.
Something that's like easily searchable.
Yeah.
Like if they search transfer from this university to like this university, something that'll like appear like, I don't know, at the top of the search. Yeah.
Yeah, like where are kids looking nowadays? Like that's kind of like, of course websites are obviously very helpful, but maybe like a little video and then straight to a website, and then you get more information. I don't know.
I think they kind of captured. Websites are really great. They're informative. I love a lot of the University of Guelph's websites. I'm like, when am I doing this? And it's like you punch into Google and they have like this whole entire comprehensive page for you to read. So I'm a big fan of websites, but I also think I'm the oldest person on the panels. That might not, I would say Instagram is my backup, and the younger generations are into TikTok. That's not, I think I'm already past that. I love a good website, but I think that they totally have a point about like even just like on a social media page, like just like a pinned something to be like, this is the most simplified way that you can understand this, and then you can kind of get into the complicated stuff.
So interesting. Maybe part of my postdoc research should be to put together a transfer TikTok. I'll keep you posted. Maybe I'll bring that to the next year's conference. I see we have about 5 minutes left in the session and wanted to invite another question from the floor. So feel free to introduce yourself and your institution.
Hello, my name is Laura, and I'm the On-Transfer Service Coordinator at ONCAT. And a big part of my role involves speaking to students that are considering transfer, and normally when they come to me, they're confused, they're a bit frazzled, and just wondering from your own experiences, or maybe that of your peers, when is a good time to have transfer-related conversations with students?
Great question.
Yeah, I can answer. Thanks for your question, Laura. I would think like October, November specifically would be like an ideal time, or like in February, March, because that's like a month into a new semester, and so that's maybe like when a lot of students are starting a semester and might be like reconsidering like, hey, maybe this isn't like a good fit for me, and then lo and behold, they like maybe haven't even considered transferring, but then if you present them with that opportunity and like walk them through how that could be done, maybe that might like open a lot of doors a lot quicker for students. And then I think over the summer as well would be a great time when students are like away from school and maybe like thinking about going back or not going back. Yeah.
So those are some great tips in terms of when in the calendar year to maybe push and offer more outreach than we typically do. I can see it especially being valuable in the summer when students might be considering their options for the coming term or for the year to come. So any final thoughts, Flora or Shannon?
I would double down on that for sure.
Yeah.
I think even like having a booth set up during that month, just so that people like know that there's other options, because there's very high numbers of people dropping out. Like I feel like during those times of the year, especially in their first year, because usually people don't know what to do. And to point on what you said, like transferring and even coming up with the idea, like you're already stressed out, you're frazzled, you don't know if it's a good decision. It's a very big decision, and it's best to have all the kinds of support you can get during that time.
I would definitely agree with like feeling like it's a big decision, because like I was 17 when I went into first year, and it feels like your entire life is like in front of you, and you feel like you're kind of set in this kind of like, okay, well, this is what I ended up doing, so like you gotta stay here, but like you have to be so patient with yourself. Like I wasn't even an adult. I give myself that like a lot. I'm like, I had to be very patient with myself a lot of the time and be like, no, like you don't have to do this, but like, what are your options? I was gonna say specifically the second week of October and the second week of February, and I can't tell you other than November and March for me have always been the worst months in the semester, because I find that like a lot of the times it's like week 10 and week 11 are just like when everything's due. So I think that like at least during midterm season, there's like kind of, I don't know, I always found it was a little bit easier during midterms versus like final papers. So like the second week of like the second month of the semester was always when I felt like, oh, okay, I'm comfortable in my classes now. I'm kind of like got my footing. I don't know, specifically the second week of the second month was always really good.
Well, thank you for that insight, and thank you so much for being a part of our student panel today, and thank you to the audience for your participation, your great questions, and for being receptive to hearing our stories. ONCAT has provided a little thank you gift to each one of our student panel presenters, so I will just thank each and every one of you for being here today, and thank you again to our audience for a wonderful session. We all will be sticking around here up at the front for the next 5-10 minutes. If you wanted to speak with us individually, I think all of us would love an opportunity to meet you one-on-one, so feel free to come up. But if you are transitioning to another program element of today's conference, it was a pleasure having your attention for this time, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.